Hello everyone, this is Homeschool. I'm in a class of my own. You can follow me on Twitter at HomeschoolMC, homeschool with a K, and I'm going to talk to you about Gjonaj versus Psycoses. This was one of the most anticipated battles from King of Adat's Blackout 6, which is a little bit ironic because we weren't supposed to know who was battling who at that event. But, oh, what a surprise! That was one of the battles that was going on. Absolutely nobody predicted that. Yeah, we knew from a long time before it happened, guys, but not only did it live up to the expectations, I think it exceeded them. This was such a fantastic battle. It's probably one of the best battles of the whole weekend. I think on paper, Disaster versus Iron Solomon was probably better, but this one felt even more intense than that one in a way, just because a lot was riding on it. Like, there were $2,000 on the line. They each put up a rack, winner take all. And you could really tell that it affected the way they were prepping for the battle. Both of them really wanted the win and the cash, and it just ended up being a really intense battle, as well as a really interesting style clash. Anyhow, for those who aren't familiar, Gjonaj and Psycoses are two major up-and-comers that King of Adat has been pushing for a little while. Psycoses has been coming up through their Ground Zero division. He's been in there for about 2 years and has had a lot of really good battles against some pretty tough competition. Not a lot of big names, but a lot of really promising talent that he's basically just mowed through. Going into this battle, he arguably hadn't lost. And then Gjonaj, on the other hand, has been around about as long as Psycoses, but he's relatively new to King of the Dot. He started out in smaller leagues like Bar Wars out in Detroit, and then he had one battle versus Gutta on Smack URL's one of their PG events, and he got a lot of buzz off of that one. And eventually, King of Adat did reach out to him, and they had him battle Disaster, and Disaster smoked his boots. He arguably didn't have a loss going into that, kind of like Psycoses was going into this battle, but yeah, Disaster bodied him. He made him look like an ant. Like, a lot of people try to say that Gjonaj took the battle that he took the battle 2-1, which, as a big Gjonaj fan, I don't see that at all. Like, even going into that second round, I already had Diz 1-0, and then Gjonaj's big choke in the second just made it impossible for him to win after that. If you want to say he took the third, fine, but at that point it was kind of too late for him to do anything about it because Disaster was like miles and miles ahead of him. But anyway, because of that battle, he really needed to prove himself with this one, and I definitely think you can see that. I think I was a little bit worried that he'd kind of get a big head and be like, oh, I didn't actually lose, and then not learn from his loss, but it's clear he did learn a lot from the Disaster battle. He's corrected a lot of the flaws he had there, but I'll get into that. In the first round, Psycoses started off with what I honestly thought was a pretty cringeworthy flip. He said something about, I'm not going to disappoint all of you, like Quill did earlier tonight with a choke. And that's hilarious for a number of reasons. First of all, Quill didn't really choke. I know the footage isn't going to be out for a while, but when it does come out, basically what happened was he forgot the bars he was saying, and then kind of like Shoddy Horror did in some of his early King of Dot appearances, he just started freestyling instead of using his writtens. And it wasn't great freestyle, but it's not like he had a big moment where he was just not saying anything, clicking his fingers, swearing, trying to think of what he was saying. He was basically just diverging from his written material into some decent freestyling. It obviously hurt his performance, but it was a stumble at worst, and definitely not a choke. But the really funny thing is that Quill was one of the 5 judges who were judging the battle. So Psycoses, in the opening bars of his first verse of the whole battle, this is one of the judges. Bro, what were you thinking? I can see how some people might find that bold, but it was really stupid for me. And honestly, if you're going to try to do something bold and like say something against one of the judges who's judging your round, at least make it a good flip that they can appreciate instead of something that didn't connect with the crowd, is not going to connect at home. It was just a terrible way to start your round. But fortunately, Psychosis really redeemed himself as that verse winner round. He started going off. He had killer flow, of course, a lot of good multis. A lot of people accuse him of focusing too much on multis and flow and using that style at the expense of content, but he had some really good content too, including probably one of the best fake chokes I've ever seen, partially just because Gjonaj very visibly fell for it. His body language was kind of like, ha, you choked, easy money, etc. But then, of course, it wasn't a choke, and the way Psychosis incorporated it into his scheme was absolutely killer. It really got the crowd going. By the end of Psychosis's first, I was thinking, I don't think Gjonaj's going to be able to stand up to that. But then Gjonaj's first round happened, and oh my goodness. He had multiple haymakers that are contenders for haymakers of the entire event in that round. Like, his style was much different than what Psychosis put forward. Psychosis was very much moving about the stage, using a lot of energy, where Gjonaj's energy was more focused directly at Psychosis. He didn't move as much, but when he did, it was very directed at Psychosis, physically making threatening gestures and the like, and he seemed like he had a more direct attack. A lot of people online I'm seeing are saying that a lot of Gjonaj's material wasn't very direct. It could have applied to anybody, but if you actually break down the concepts he was going for, a good 50% of it or more was very close to what he was doing against Psychosis. It was tailor-made for his opponent. It's just that his concepts are very heady, and he almost never goes after the thing you'd expect him to go for in his opponents. So he went after things like Psychosis underestimating him. He went after things like not caring about what Psychosis's fan base thought of him, not wanting to convert them to fans of his because he honestly didn't care for their opinion. Things like that. But oh my goodness. Early on in his first verse, he had a Silence of the Lambs scheme, and he incorporated a Buffalo Bill based punch into that, which was absolutely skin crawling. It was one of those lines that gets more and more uncomfortable the more you think about it, and it was really effective, and especially with his delivery and tying into his whole supervillain serial killer persona that he goes for while he's battling. And I thought it was really close, but Gjonaj definitely matched what Psychosis had put forward in that first round, and I was like, okay, yeah, we've got a battle now. And then Psychosis freestyled once again at the beginning of his second, and this time he did much better. He took Gjonaj's scheme about Silence of the Lambs and added to it, and the crowd slipped on it a little, to be honest. I felt like it was a much better flip than they were giving him credit for. There were like 3 different spots of wordplay that tied into a specific scene in the movie really well. I was impressed by it. That round went pretty decent. It wasn't as good as Psy's first, but he did really well. And then Gjonaj had a second round, which, again, wasn't as good as his first, but it was still really good. He had, oh, good grief, I'll spoil one line. He said something along the lines of, I can count how many friends I have on Jason Pierre-Paul's hands, which was really sick. And then the end of that round was really close, too, and it was just a crazy battle, and it was just getting better and better. And then Psychosis probably had his best round of the battle in the third. Like, I slipped on it a little the first time I watched it, but second time I watched it, it was really fire. He had a lot of good content, good quotables, but like his multis and his flow really shined here. A lot of people, like I said, they accuse him of using that as a gimmick, but he does it better than almost anyone else I've seen. You can almost compare him to someone like Dialect from the UK, who uses a lot of rapid fire flow and some multis and just that style in general. And sometimes it's at the expense of good punches, but he does it well enough that it's always interesting to watch and it just sounds good, especially against a guy like Gjonaj, who a lot of people don't like the sound of his voice. Personally, I don't mind Gjonaj's voice. I think it fits well into his persona, but it is very rough, and I could see people having a hard time listening to it, whereas someone like Psychosis, it just sounds aesthetically pleasing to hear. It's kind of like someone like Pass, who just has a voice that you really enjoy listening to while he's rapping. It's that same sort of effect. Like, as it went along, Psychosis just kept impressing me, and I thought he finished really strong. I did have one minor gripe, though. There was a point in his third verse where he's making a big list of lines where he felt like Gjonaj was reaching, and to be fair, they were all reaches, but all he did was quote the Gjonaj line and then yell, "That's a reach!" Quote the Gjonaj line, yell, "That's a reach!" Quote the Gjonaj line, yell, "That's a reach!" Quote the Gjonaj line, yell, "That's a reach!" over and over. So he had at least 4 bars back to back where there were no rhymes whatsoever. He was just rhyming "that's a reach" with itself 4 times. It's weird because so many people accuse him of rhyming too much, having too many multis. I wanted more rhymes for him in that moment. I thought he wasn't rhyming anything, and it was just boring, and it was stuff that people had already pointed out, like Born went over Gjonaj reaching, and even quoted one of the same reaches that Psychosis quoted in this battle, and I thought Born did that a lot better when he battled Gjonaj, and I felt like Psy could have done something more creative than just naming some of Gjonaj's reaches and then pointing out that it was a reach. There's nothing creative in that. Okay, maybe that's more of a major gripe than a minor gripe, but I still felt like it was a strong round overall. And then Gjonaj delivered his third, and it was really good also. He had a lot of his trademark aggression, but it was focused. Like previous Gjonaj performances, sometimes he feels like he's a lot crazier than his opponent. He felt calm and collected through a lot of his performance, but aggressive at the same time. Like his aggression was very much directed at Psychosis, where Psychosis, like I said, was kind of flailing around the stage, just throwing everything everywhere, and Gjonaj very much just sped straight toward his target. And at the end of it, I had Gjonaj 2-1. It's actually funny. I watched the battle 3 different times. The first time, I had Psychosis taking the first round and Gjonaj taking the second 2. The second time I watched it, I had Gjonaj taking the first 2 and Psychosis taking the third. And then the third time I watched it, I had Gjonaj taking 1 and 3 and Psychosis taking second. So I had Gjonaj winning each time I watched it, but you could tell how close these rounds were because I had Psy taking a different round every time I watched it. It was just one of those battles where it's going to be extremely debatable, especially because it was judged, and spoiler alert, the judges gave the decision 3-2 to Gjonaj. Organic was such a savage, too. He even, it's a 3-2 split decision, 4, and then he kind of leaned towards Psychosis and then went, Gjonaj, and kind of psyched people out. It was... you can't mess with people's minds like that, Organic, but anyway, I feel like the judges made the right decision in more ways than one. I feel like Gjonaj did deserve the win because his content was just hitting a little harder overall, but at the same time, I feel like it deserved to be a 3-2 split decision because this was such a tight battle. So it did so well. There were no real stumbles from anybody, unless you count Psychosis' fake choke, which you'd better not. And it was just a really entertaining battle all around. I think people are going to really dig it when it does get the YouTube release. I hope it gets as many views as Gjonaj versus Disaster did. It might have a harder time of that because none of them are really big names yet, but hopefully the word gets out that this battle is really good and people want to see it because it was a very interesting style clash. It just resonated really well on camera while you were watching it, and it's got so much replay value. Like every time I watch Gjonaj's rounds, I find something new, and every time I watch Psychosis's rounds, I don't really find more new things, but I like remember what I saw previously, and when I see it again, I'm like, it still gives me chills. And so I really recommend getting the King of a Dot pay-per-view just for this battle alone, really. Also, Diz versus Iron Solomon, which I'll hopefully get to another time because that battle was absolutely crazy as well. But anyway, I have Gjonaj 2-1. You can agree or disagree, and you can comment giving your opinions on the battle, who you felt won. And this is Homeschool. I am signing out. Bye for now.